Any
Yeah,
questions?
that was great. Thank you so much for giving the keynote.
Thank you.
Um, so do you think that we could just move directly into the AMA?
Yeah,
And
let's do it.
okay, sure. So I just posted out like invitation to the AMA on the Slack. So there might be a couple of people that just joined the AMA and did not see the keynote. So I'll just give them the bio that you sent me earlier.
Sounds good.
Okay. Ge Wang is an associate professor at Stanford University in music, computer science, and the Center of Computer Research in Music and Acoustics. He researches the artful design of tools, instruments, toys, games, and social experiences. Ge is the architect of the Chuck music programming language, director of the Stanford Laptop Orchestra, and the Karma VR Design Lab, co-founder of Smule, and designer of the Ocarina and Magic Piano apps for mobile phones. He is a 2016 Guggenheim Fellow and the author of Artful Design Technology in Search of the Sublime, a photo comic book about the ethics and aesthetics of shaping technology. Yeah, so just again, thank you so much for coming and agreeing to this. So we had a bunch of like pre-submitted questions, so I will start with one of those and just weave them through the whole thing. Um, in the other AMAs we've been doing, we've been having people raise their hand, but I actually think it might be better if instead of that, you guys could just put your comment in the chat, and then I'll say your name, and then you can unmute and turn on your camera and ask your question. Let me turn on my camera. Okay, great. So just the first question is, sometimes there can be a divide between the arts and technical fields. Um, could you give some examples of the challenges that you've gone through with interdisciplinary research in that gap and how you like overcame it?
That's a great question. In fact, I'm going to go back to this, right? The pie-shaped student. This is, for me, the kind of what it means to be interdisciplinary. And also it's the why you might want to be interdisciplinary. Like the arts, the humanities, social sciences, and engineering shouldn't be separate things, because to do any of that well, you want to think about how it connects with everything else, right? And you want to have a kind of sensibility about the technology you're designing. And you know what? How do you gain sensibility? Well, you make art. That is art. Art is also kind of a, well, as James Baldwin so famously wrote once, the purpose of art is to lay bare the questions that have been obscured by the answers, right? So art isn't about answering questions. Art is actually about something even more fundamental, and that's like, what questions should we ask ourselves? What is the meaning of things? And so actually for something like artificial intelligence, to do AI well, you can't just learn all there is to learn about algorithms and models and techniques and in AI. You got to also learn what it means. You got to learn a little philosophy. You got to learn to, do some art and use that as a tool to process what AI might mean for you in the world. And same with kind of, literature, anthropology, communication studies, media studies, philosophy. All of these things they're not separate things. They can't be. And we only think of them as separate things because of the way that increasingly we tend towards specialization. And it's easier to think of them as separate things. But you know what? The world is not a separate thing. You don't get to separate those out in real world and be like, well, that's the philosophy part and that's the engineering part of life. No, when you are engineering a system, it's all there. You don't get, well, what does it say on the back of the Whole Earth catalog? You cannot put it together. It is together. The world is not something that you can separate out when it's convenient. It's all part of it. So I've had a lot of challenges with the art in engineering, and precisely because that people don't think it's necessarily like a part of the same vehicle. Challenges include trying to get computer scientists to understand, why does that I do what I do? What's the value of my work? challenge is also to help like more traditional music and art folks understand the value of why am I using new technology for this stuff. And the challenge for everyone I've encountered is what in the world is design? What does that have to do with anything? And how's that different than art? Well, I'm a tool builder. I build things. And for me, design is all tool building. But I think tool building is something, it's a craft and it's an art unto itself. And there's a humanistic side to it, and it requires engineering. And so trying to help people understand design perhaps has been the single most multidisciplinary challenge that I've had to overcome. And part of this, and by the way, I tell the story every year at at least for the last 2 years at the new faculty orientation at Stanford. And that's a story about how about my tenure story of like me going through this 2-year venture of helping people understand why, like what it is that I do and why, as a computer scientist working with computer music who designs tools and apps. So I'm kind of the poster child for the disciplinarily confused. But I will point out in the word confusion, you cannot spell confusion without also writing the word fusion. And I think what I do is a kind of fusion. So I don't know if that actually answers your question. The thing is, when you try to do things that go across more established boundaries, you will need to do more work. That's just the truth of it, because that's not the easiest way for people to understand what you do. But gosh darn it, it might just be the most interesting thing and most cool thing that you could do, is to do things because you're interested in bringing together different things that may not seem like they go together.
Yeah,
I have no idea if the answer to your question, but thanks for asking it.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of putting it. So I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name properly, but Tene has a question. Would you like to turn on your video and I will unmute you? There.
Yeah. First of all, thank you.
Hi.
So my question to you was, how do you balance sort of your daily responsibilities and all the work that you have to do with sort of just having fun building things and hacking?
With some difficulty, but it's worth it. How do I balance? I mean, I have to do the same thing as everyone else. I mean, I worry about the same things as everyone else. Like, how do I make a living in this world? How can I get a job? I worried about that. I mean, I have a job now, but I mean, once upon a time, I worried about that when I was in school. I do not come from a wealthy family, so I'm really I've got to figure out a way to make it get out there in the world. But your question is also, how do you do that without forsaking the things that you feel like makes you, right? And it's different for everyone. And for me, it is actually trying to follow my interest and to insist on doing the things I think are interesting, but also doing my best to help others understand it. So it's like going ahead and do the thing that you think is cool, is awesome. But then talk to people, try to understand how they think about it, but also doing your best to help them see what's artful or interesting about what you're doing, rather than trying to say, you know what, no one else is going to get what I'm doing. This is never going to get me a job. This is never going to get me tenure. It's never going to get me X, Y, or Z. And to just not do it. I think there are reasons to not do things. But that probably shouldn't be a reason, especially if you have a mind to do something at the intersection of disciplines. Instead, you should go ahead and try it and then help others understand. And that's kind of been my approach. In fact, I'm just too oblivious most of the time to know a lot of things. So maybe I went ahead and built apps as a Stanford professor, and then there were questions raised when it came time to evaluating me as a professor. It's like, is that research? Well, it depends on how you look at it. So then I learned I have to really make the argument. And having friends that are like-minded in appreciating things that are cool in and of themselves, rather than saying, well, you got to do this because it's useful to you. Sometimes to do a thing because it's interesting in and of itself is just as good of a reason. So for me, like my day to day is, yeah, I got no shortage of things I have to take care of, you know, from meetings to just a lot of tasks that just needs to be done. That's part of the job, to then trying to carve time out to go work on things that I think are really fun and interesting. Who was it that said it's not enough to follow your interests? You have to fight for them. So I guess I've kind of learned that that's kind of been my mode. But ultimately, like because I'm interested in the things that I'm interested in, working on them, as long as I have time, is actually easy. They're like, it's not easy to do them well, but it's easy just to do them because I'm interested in them. And that it's like playing a video game that I love. Like you just get hooked, right? And in fact, as much as I love video games, I'd say it's even more fun to build a video game, to go make something. And I think that goes with the programming language Chuck, that goes with Ocarina, that goes with everything that I feel like I'm proud of building. Because you know what, they're interesting. And again, like Ocarina, what problems does it solve? Well, I don't know. Like nobody asked for this. I just thought, what if we just built this? So love the question. And I will tell you honestly that it's not always easy. In fact, most of the time it's not, but it might be worth it.
Great. So we have a question from Terry. I will unmute you and then you can turn on your video and ask your question.
There we go. So hi, a little bit about myself, I guess, to sort of set up this question. So I'm a second year student at UCSD. I'm a double major in computer science and music.
Good for you.
With my general studies in like cognitive science, so human-centered design also. So yeah, I think there were a lot of interesting points that you brought up in your talk. And like one of the things that I've been studying at UCSD is sort of like experimental music and using like computers and algorithms to push like different types of like sound spaces. Like in our audio spatialization lab, it's sort of like this hybrid world between physical acoustics and like using speakers to generate sound. And like, I think one of the things that I've been like learning in my classes is sort of like experimental music and how breaking like the normal definitions of art using technology, and like sometimes like creating a piece that is, you know, not your stereotypical like 4/4 beat rhythm, strong beats on 1 and 3 and stuff like that, but like for example, like with what you showed in Chuck earlier, with like randomly generating tones and using that to create like a piece of sound art. Like, is there like new definitions that you sort of like when you're trying something new with computers and music for how you like define design? Or is there ever like a point where you're just like, oh, this was like a wrong step, you know, we should stick back to the basics of design or something like that?
Let me see if I can try that. Well, thanks for that context. It's really great to know that you're double majoring in two of my favorite disciplines. And also, yeah, UCSD with, I mean, it makes sense that you're also studying CogSci with Don Norman and folks there at UCSD. So yeah, I've been to the design lab there. It's a wonderful place. Scott Clemmer, Don Norman, and others. And it's also a great place for computer music. So good for you. In a way, like, I think design for me is again, tool building. So when I'm designing like Chuck was a tool. That was an active design. When I'm making music with Chuck, I still might be designing in a way that, yeah, I guess composers do design, but ultimately composers more specifically are composing. So, you know, for me, I do think of them slightly differently in that there are times when I'm tool building and there are times I'm just expressing. I just want to create something because I want to create it. And that's, I guess, the difference for me between art and design is that art can be a pure act of pure aesthetics, pure act of expression, whereas design does need to have a stated purpose that is of some, well, should address some established aim. And as far as making computer music is concerned, the thing I've come to appreciate is just the idea that, what makes for good computer music? That's a good question. Like, that's a good philosophical question. I think at the end of the day, what makes for good computer music should not be different than however you would answer what makes for good music, period. Like, those should not be separate questions. We probably shouldn't have a separate, be like, well, it's computer music, so good computer music should do this. I think good computer music, if I were to say something specific, I would say good computer music is music that takes advantage of the medium. But actually, that's true of all music. If you're writing a song for guitar, you should try to write the music. You would write it differently if you're writing for an acoustic guitar than you're writing for a flute. You just would not write music the same way because the mediums are different. Same with a computer. The difference is the computer, unlike the traditional guitar and the traditional flute, is programmable. There's a meta level for the computer that doesn't quite exist, not in the programmable sense, for guitar and flutes. So I think the question is, how do I take advantage of the computer well? But in a way, that's not a different question that has ever existed for composers, is how do I really take advantage of the instruments or the orchestra, the orchestration, and whatever size and make up the ensemble I'm actually working with. It's just a different tool. So I don't know if that answered your question, but for me, it's helpful to think about computer music when we're thinking about the medium. But ultimately, like, the word computer kind of dissolves and disappears and just leaves you with the word music. And design, I think, is just a broad term for that. It's not really if you're tool building, that's design. I think when Bach laid out a prelude, yeah, he was definitely designing at some point, but it gets more and more academic, I guess, when we think about design in that sense. Ultimately, music is music, design is design. For me, however, I would say design is something that maybe could be like art, in the sense that there is an intrinsically valuable part of it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. And rock on at UCSD.
Thank you.
Cool. So there's a question that was posted during the keynote. Ryan, you posted a question. Would you like to ask it, or would you prefer me just reading it out? I'll just read it out in that case. So Ryan says, the philosophy you mentioned where we must be creative and explorative is quite contrary to the traditional thought that entrepreneurs must create products that have a defined customer and satisfy a need. How does one balance embracing their creativity while also considering the end user and impact?
Great question. Actually, there are two different questions there. I'm going to address the one that I think you're asking. It sounds like you're asking more, which is, how do you balance, I guess, the intrinsically interesting thing with the audience? That a thing, like, for example, I think actually about writing a book, right? If you write a book, it is something that you want to say, but you do have to consider your audience. Who is it? Who did you write the book for? And in that sense, I think you do have to find a balance. In fact, in the book Artful Design, I say design is a radical synthesis of extrinsic motivation. And that's like, I think other people should understand this, other people should be able to get this, with intrinsic motivation, which is, I think this is good to do. This is who I am. And design is actually not about building the thing, but trying to find this dialogue between these two forces. They're both motivating forces. The one is like, a lot of people should find this useful or interesting. The other is, I should find this interesting. Who are you designing for? Artful design would say a combination of both, but the art is in finding that combination, the balance. Ideally, you want to find something that speaks to both. Like Ocarina for me was that. It was a #1 selling app for 3 weeks in like the whole world. That was not expected. That was not why I designed it. Even though, yes, did I design it hoping that it would sell like hotcakes? Yes, absolutely. When I was at Smule, when I was designing these products, every product, knowing that we were a venture-backed commercial company, like, yeah, a goal of mine was this thing's got to sell like hotcakes. And I'm going to do everything I can to make this sell like hotcakes. So it speaks to what this needs to be as a product, as a business product. But there was also a place, a safe haven, if you will, that I kind of carved out in my own designs. And that is separate and pretends that the whole extrinsic dimension temporarily doesn't exist. You suspend belief. And in this space, you're safe to do whatever it is you think is awesome. And then you just bounce back and forth. I design backwards. Right? I think designers all seem to do that, right? I mean, designing backward means what are your end goals, and you got to go backwards to figure out how do you get there. For me, designing backwards also means how do I want this thing to feel? And that for me is actually both an intrinsic thing and an extrinsic thing. If I were designing a chair or like an app or a software, I'm not building, because I'm building this for someone else, I not only want this to be useful for them, I actually want them to feel something. That's, I guess, the artful design, right? When you're using this software, which is a programming language, how do you feel? And that was absolutely something I designed backwards from in designing Chuck. This is a language I want you to feel like cognitively you are aligned with what you're coding. I want you to feel that it's safe to experiment. I want you to feel happy, actually, frankly. Is why it's called Chuck. It's like the best friend. Also, it's a verb to throw. Also, it's something that's good, just free for experimentation. There's a lot of feels in there. So for me, I think when design really works, the extrinsic goals and the intrinsic goals find a way to merge. And you can't tell where one ends and where the other one begins. When that happens, hallelujah, that's you may have succeeded in some big part of the design. And if it holds up to your values and it actually does something for someone else. And of course, there's a whole ethical dimension here, and all of this is the ethical dimension that we just talked about. But I think it's always a challenge. I think what you should not do is forget about either one of these. I think it's easy right now to forget about you. Right now it's like, what does the customer want? What does the user want? And I think that's a prevailing wisdom. This is why we do analytics. This is why we go and try to test things. And I think there's value in that. But that shouldn't entirely take the place of the vision that you have as a designer. And that's a tricky balance. It's a tricky balance, and it does not always work out. There's not always a solution to that. But darn it, is it worth trying to find the solution? That's the... I don't know if I actually answered your question. I don't know if I've answered any questions. I'm just kind of going on, but if there's a follow-up to kind of whether I've actually answered your question, please feel free to speak up or write in chat, because I want to make sure I actually get to the nuances of what you're asking. So I think it's a fantastic question. In fact, the whole entire book of Artful Design is truly getting at this extrinsic motivation, that which you do because what the world expects of you, and intrinsic motivation, that's what you do for yourself. And you can't lose either.
Cool. So I know you signed up until 5:15, but there are 2 more questions. Are you
happy to? Yeah, I'd be happy to stay on. Anyone else that's I know y'all got a hackathon to finish, but I'm happy to stay and answer these questions.
Okay, great. So we've got a question from Adam. I just unmuted you.
Hello. You know a lot about music and computers and AI. Do you believe that AI ever has the potential to overtake human composers in music? And then if so, do you believe that's ethical?
Wonderful, wonderful question. We just talked about this actually in Artful Design TV, and I wrote about it. And I have a whole article I wrote exactly on this. Let me see if I can show you. If you go to artful.design, same one place you can find one website to find them all. Let's see here. And if you go to author, let me see, there's a Human in the Loop, the design of interactive AI systems. In fact, at the opening of this is this almost a very similar question to what you've asked me. It's like, hey, good, do you think we'll ever have robot musicians? You asked me, will AI overtake human musicians and composers, right? And I say, do you mean that are as good as humans? And Juliana here says, yeah, that's what I mean. And here I give this like tongue-in-cheek answer, but I actually kind of believe it. I say, I reckon we'll have true robot musicians the day we have true robot philosophers. And she's like, oh, that would imply machines will have understood something more subtly human. I say, yeah, I mean, isn't music more than notes on a page or sound waves through the air? More than a product, it's also a process with meaning. So therein lies, I think, my answer to your question. In that one is, I don't know, and it depends. It depends on what you mean by overtake, or what does it mean for the AI to overtake the composer? In what way, right? For example, here's something that I don't know what it means to overtake. Let's take a composer that we all know of, Beethoven. Let's take a specific piece of work, the Third Symphony, the Eroica. Could we have an AI that generate notes that can that symphony be generated by an AI? Conceivably, yes. In the same way that even if you just enumerate all possible, if you have the whole monkeys at typewriters, even if you enumerate all the possible notes and notes durations, instrumentation for a given length, you can probably, one of those might be Beethoven's Third Symphony, the Eroica. But here's the question. Will the meaning be the same? And what is the meaning of that particular symphony? Well, if, for the Third Symphony, Beethoven wrote that symphony as a kind of a statement for himself. Because you know what? Beethoven was actually going up against some really huge personal challenges, limitations in his life at that time. Namely, he was going deaf. Think about a composer going deaf. That seems like the worst thing possible. Like this, the one tool that you would want to have, you're losing your hearing. I mean, he was clinically deaf for the latter half, like the latter part of his life. And he was so distraught about this that he contemplated suicide. We know this because of a letter he wrote but never sent, but kept with him for the rest of his life. And in this letter, he said, I cannot even go to social events. I mean, think about it, like the joke of a composer who can't even hear. But instead of that, Beethoven decided that music would be his salvation. And that music, in this sheer act of self-expression, therein lies his expression, his salvation, and therein lies the meaning of the Third Symphony by Beethoven. Can the notes be generated by computer, by an AI? Conceivably. Study enough Beethoven, you might be able to do stuff that sounds like Beethoven. But the meaning of the Third Symphony, I don't know how you can overtake that. If there's no humans involved in the actual production of the thing, maybe in programming the system, is it about the story of the people that programmed the system? I want to know the story. I want to know the context. I want to know the process, right? And the other way to think about it is like cooking. If you enjoy cooking or like playing anything, right? Can an AI cook overtake you as a cook? Certainly it can overtake me as a cook. I'm not that good of a cook. But does that, even if I could do that and AI creates food that I just love to eat, would I want to give up the option of ever going to the kitchen and cooking something for myself? I wouldn't. Like, I would want the option of going and cooking things for myself because the process of cooking is really valuable for me. I like doing it. It's joy. It's joyful. It's satisfying to eat something that I've made out of raw ingredients. Same with music, right? The process is part of the product, actually. And so I think this is the it depends part, is it depends on what you mean by good. Like, how good can AI write music? Well, this is why studying music, studying history, studying philosophy, and studying engineering together gives you actually this broader set of questions. Because then it's no longer this question, A or B question of like, can I do it, yes or no? It becomes a much more frustrating question, but it's a better question. Frustrating question is like, it depends, but no one likes to hear it depends. We're like, no, yes or no. When we say it depends, though, we actually uncover something about what it means to make music. Do we make music because we want to try to understand ourselves? And maybe music isn't about even always the product. Music is about this process of trying to understand ourselves. And in that, we actually might fail most of the time. But the failing actually is what makes it art. That we try, that we are just innately curious about ourselves, and we express things with sounds, images, sculptures, physical objects, software. We make art with these things as this means of expression, as a means of understanding ourselves. And even when we are not successful, the questions is actually the art. So your question is a beautiful question, and this is my way of saying it depends, but I'm hoping to give you a critical way of thinking about how I think about the it depends piece of this. It's like I think there are parts where AI can and will do better. And there are parts where AI, it's not that it can't do better, it's not meaningful. One final example, just playing anything. Playing, I don't know, Fortnite to playing football, it doesn't matter. No matter how bad I am, if I enjoy playing Fortnite or football, given the option of playing the thing myself versus like an AI playing in my place, what would you choose? Right? What would you choose actually? I mean, if a game that you like playing, or a toy or an activity, would you want an AI to just do it for you if it can do it better? I mean, I guess it's a question for everyone, right? I mean, it probably depends on the thing. Sometimes, yeah, sure, take over for me. Other times, like, no matter how bad I suck, the whole point of me playing is so I get the experience of playing. And it doesn't really matter if another entity can do it better, because the whole point of it comes back to my experiential value of the process of actually doing the thing. So I think it depends in this situation, especially with AI, and also I don't know, are like probably two of the best meta answers that I think we could give, because behind that, the question you asked, when you apply this it depends way to think about it, opens up a whole world of other questions, which I think are really productive to ask. Yeah. I don't know if I've answered, again, I feel like I've answered like no questions.
Ryan actually just sent in the chat that you answered his question well, so that's good. Yeah, okay, so I think we are just gonna end the AMA with one last question from Julian. Julian, are you able to talk?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Julian.
Hi. So I just have a quick question. I was wondering who or what inspired you to become a professor to, I guess, teach your knowledge to other students?
Oh man, that's a good question. I definitely did not plan on being a professor or a teacher. Like, that was not something that I like in high school or college. Be like, I think I'm going to aspire to be. I don't even know what I aspired to be. At some point, I aspired to be a doctor. I aspired to be a rock musician. That's in high school. I was like, you know what? I'm going to rock. I think at some point I realized I love to rock. Also, I love building things that help myself and others rock. that's the designer in me, right? So, and also actually, and this part never, I don't know, maybe I was influenced by this, but I'm like a fourth generation teacher. Like my dad is a professor. My grandparents were both teachers. My great grandfather, he was a teacher. And so I come from this line of teachers, but I never thought I'd be a teacher. I'd be like, well, that's for my parents, grandparents, and even great grandparent. But I found that I enjoyed teaching. I love teaching, actually. That's probably something that it's a good quality. I'm very lucky to have that love of teaching, because otherwise I don't think one should become a teacher of any kind if you don't actually enjoy it. The other side is that hand in hand with the teaching part is, for me, like this ability to do research and a freedom to explore things. And that's also the other side of what being a professor actually gets you, provided you're in an environment that values this kind of exploration. And thankfully for me, Karma at Stanford is such a place. It's a place that is accepting, that is inclusive, or at least, we have our kinks, and we have a lot of things that we need to work out. We could be better in a lot of ways, but in general, it's a place that tries to be open to exploration from different viewpoints and by a diverse community of people. And even though computer music is a community, I have to say, it's getting better, but it has not been a very diverse community, right? I mean, the gender ratio in computer music is still to this day really unbalanced, very skewed. There are a lot of underrepresented groups within working with technology, working with computer music, working with music, right? But it is a place that would have me. And I'm very fortunate that it would have me, because I felt a great freedom to do what I did. And also a point of influence, actually my advisor in grad school, Perry Cook, if you go to Artful Design TV, you'll see the second episode is all just bantering with my advisor, Perry Cook. He built really wacky stuff. Upon entering grad school, I was at Princeton and computer science. Here's my crazy advisor in his lab playing music using a coffee mug controller he had built out of sensors. And he's playing like a trumpet with these force sensing resistors on top of and tilting it. And he's playing like a shaker in 1 minute, and it becomes kind of this fusion band. And it's like, whoa. Immediately this no one asked for it, for that kind of thought entered my mind. And that made me feel so free to go and do things that are interesting. And if your advisor is as crazy and as whimsical as you would hope to be, or maybe even more so, I can tell you what sense of freedom and what true autonomy to explore you actually feel. So among many others, I would say my advisor, Perry Cook at Princeton, was a huge source of inspiration that made me feel like it's okay to go be a professor. And by the way, after starting at Stanford, this is 2007, I'm like, Perry, is it normal to feel like I don't know what I'm doing as a professor? Perry gives his usual sage advice. It only gets worse. So, I think faking it until you don't make it, or just faking it and doing your best as anything. And I'm telling you this as a 13-year professor at Stanford. It has been a while. I can't believe I'm here for that long. Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for all my colleagues, but I'm constantly horrified at that I'm actually influencing the minds and thoughts and sensibilities of other people. And so I think it's a huge honor and a huge responsibility. And I think with anything where you feel a sense of responsibility, I think some humility is in order. And so I think once I realized wow, Perry's answer was perfect, because I just realized it's okay to just fail once in a while, and I fail a lot. And also I've learned so much from my students. It's just crazy. And so, I think my students already know this, is that it looks like I'm teaching them and it looks like I'm advising them if they're grad students. Ultimately, they're managing me. They're helping me figure out what's interesting, and I'm just soaking it up while I'm trying my best to help them. And that may be useful in some sense. Hopefully it's useful for my students. Hopefully it's in some way useful for the world the students are going to enter into. But also it's an end in itself. It seems like it's worth doing. And in this, I think back to my grandparents, think back to my parents, and think about how good being a teacher makes you realize how good or bad other teachers or other people who you thought weren't teachers actually were. And being a teacher made me realize how good of a teacher my parents, my grandparents have been. I was like, wow, 20 years later, that was I can see why you did that now. You were being a really good teacher. And I didn't know it at the time, but so I think another source of information would just be, I think, people you recognize to be good teachers. In this case, they were my family. Anyway, thanks for that question.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again. We're all extremely grateful for you.
Thank you. And if there's one more in chat.
There is.
I'd be happy to answer any more if there's any.
Sorry, I did not see that.
It is better sometimes and can be fun. I'm not sure if it's
I think he was making a comment for your question.
Aimbot? Anyway, it seemed like there was a question lurking there, but yeah. Thank you all for having me, and check out Artful Design. But more importantly, be safe, be healthy, stay artful in whatever it is that you do.